Thank you for joining us today on the Moms Who Know podcast, the podcast for moms who know that when they take care of themselves, they can take better care of everyone else. One of the best ways to take care of yourself is through having a morning routine. I love my time in the morning when I get up and have time to myself. It is precious to me, and I make sure that it happens every day. Now, if you don't have a morning routine, you need Ultimate Morning Makeover, because what a morning routine will do for you is not just change your morning and give you that time for self-care every morning. What that self-care in the morning does for you will change your entire day. It'll change how you show up as a mom. It will change the way the rest of your day goes and how you interact with your kids and your husband and with life in general. It'll help you to reach goals. You can tell I am passionate about morning routines because I know that taking that time for yourself regularly, consistently, will make all the difference for you as a mom. So if you missed it last time and you were sad, I know there were people who wanted to, but the timing didn't work out for them. We are starting again February 1st. I hope you'll join me. You can get all the information at momswhoknowpodcast.com/morning. You'll find that there. Sign up, join me. It'll be a great month, and I am excited to work with you. So today's episode is another episode of Couples Who Know with me and my husband, James. It's a good one. You're going to enjoy this. So let's get to the show. Hello and welcome to the Moms Who Know podcast. I'm your host, Chanel Nielsen, for this episode of Couples Who Know with my husband, James. James, thanks for being here.
So good to be with you today.
Today, we're going to start off with a story that we read that we thought was really meaningful and had a lot of application for marriage. So this comes from a talk by Dieter F. Uchtdorf called A Matter of a Few Degrees. And he says this: in 1979, a large passenger jet with 257 people on board left New Zealand for a sightseeing flight to Antarctica and back. Unknown to the pilots, however, someone had modified the flight coordinates by a mere 2 degrees. This error placed the aircraft 28 miles to the east of where the pilots assumed they were. As they approached Antarctica, the pilots descended to a lower altitude to give the passengers a better look at the landscape. Although both were experienced pilots, neither had made this particular flight before, and they had no way of knowing that the incorrect coordinates had placed them directly in the path of Mount Erebus, an active volcano that rises from the frozen landscape to a height of more than 12,000 feet. As the pilots flew onward, the white of the snow and ice covering the volcano blended with the white of the clouds above, making it appear as though they were flying over flat ground. By the time the instruments sounded the warning that the ground was rising fast toward them, it was too late. The airplane crashed into the side of the volcano, killing everyone on board. It was a terrible tragedy brought on by a minor error, a matter of only a few degrees. He goes on to say, I have learned that the difference between happiness and misery in individuals, in marriages, and families often comes down to an error of only a few degrees. So we thought this story had a lot of relevance, and I'll turn it over to James. James, what stands out to you, and what does this particular story mean to you?
What a tragic story. Just by a few degrees, all those lives were lost. And truly, that's a sad thing. I think it's a sad thing that happens in our marriages as well. Couples that are off by just those few degrees are so unhappy. And I've thought about couples that I've seen in the time that we've been married, and it seems like those small errors that they didn't take time to correct really have a lasting effect. And being off by a few degrees, it's so critical to try to self-correct and get back on course. And I think you can do that. I definitely think it's possible, and we'll talk more about that in a minute here. But I wanted to ask you, Chanel, what your thoughts were on the story as well.
Yeah, it really is tragic. It's just so sad that a simple mistake was compounded and just became, so many lives lost. To me, it really made me think of the little things. It was such a tiny thing. Some guy in air traffic control, or I don't know what his job is, but some guy in the airline industry needed to check this flight path and this little tiny error that was so easy to overlook. And so what it made me think of is kind of the daily rituals and the daily things that we do as a couple, because they seem so small as to almost seem like they don't matter. And yet they're so important because they're these little things that keep us on course. So specifically, I had a few that came to mind, and James, maybe you can help me think of some others that are little daily rituals that we do that keep our marriage on course. So one of those is how we say goodbye to each other and we say hello to each other, that leaving and coming together. So I stay home with the kids and James goes to work. And so every day before he leaves, we pray together and we kiss each other goodbye. Because it matters to us, we're going to be separated for the day. And yeah, it's only, 8 hours. It's not that big of a deal, but it matters that we say, hey, we want to connect before you leave.
It does. And if you think about that, we set our intention. We set our intention for the day. And even when I get home from work, or when you get home from wherever you are, and I've been home with the kids. So that moment that you see each other or that you're leaving each other, you create an intention. And I like that. I like that we are able to pray together, that we're able to kiss each other goodbye and then do the same thing when we get back home. That helps me so much.
I think that's a huge one. It's so small, but taking that second to connect. And actually, if it is only a second, sometimes one of us will say, hey, if I wanted to kiss my grandma, we say, a little more kiss here, a little more hug. And we really try to make that, even though it's a short thing, that's a really important one. Another one that comes to mind is family dinner. Now that's with the whole family, of course, but that's still a family ritual and a couple ritual that we sit down together as a family and have a meal that is, as much as possible, distraction free. We don't have our phones at the table. We're not talking to other people. It's a time for just us as a family. And so that one is more family related, I guess, than couples specifically, but still an important daily ritual.
Yeah, absolutely. Those little things help so much, and it sets the tone, I guess, is what I pick out from you telling those things that we do. And I think that every family can consciously choose how they're going to set their course. And this is something that if you have kids, that you can get them involved in as well. What do we want our family to do? We have a family motto, and our kids know what it is. And we really try to make sure everybody's on the same page so that we can fly this life journey together, because it's hard sometimes. I think that it takes a lot of self-discipline to stay on course. I was going to ask you your thoughts, Chanel, on being self-disciplined.
Yeah. So just meaning like being self-disciplined about doing those little things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So it's a good question, because I think a lot of times it seems like those little things don't matter. And so it can be easy to let them slide in the moment. And yet, for me, I've seen the benefit. So it's more than just a kiss. Hello. It's not necessarily about kissing. It's about, like you said, setting an intention. So I guess for me, the discipline comes down to what I want from our marriage. And so that means if I'm on the phone, even, which I don't talk on the phone a lot, but this did happen just this week, that I'm on the phone as much as possible. I try to get off the phone when you come home.
Oh, I appreciate that so much. That is right. That is intentional. And that's something that I've forgotten. Yeah.
It matters to me. It's not like, oh yeah, my husband's here, what were you saying? And go on my phone call. Occasionally that happens. And in fact, this week, my sister had called and was saying something important and I needed to finish that phone call. I still said, hang on just a second to her. I gave James a hug and kiss hello. I finished up the conversation and then I gave him a more proper welcome home. But the self-discipline part really, to me, comes in to knowing where I want our marriage to be and what I want it to be like. So those little things are just steps along the road.
You bet. One thing I wanted to share too was how easily you can get off. We've been off before in our marriage. I think that's okay to say, right?
Yeah.
No, we're definitely not perfect. But when I say we've been off, I mean, sometimes we just have maybe a week where we're not jiving and it just doesn't feel right. And so what we've done to course correct is to sit down and try to figure out why. Where did we take the wrong turn? And I think those conversations, those open conversations are so important. And you know what? Sometimes it doesn't come out right away. But I think when it does resolve itself the quickest is when one of us is quick to either forgive or humble themselves to just look inside themselves and see what maybe their challenges are or why they might be acting this way. I think when we were talking before about this, you had something.
Yeah. So that happened pretty recently. So you guys, if you listen to the podcast, I kind of lean towards minimalism. I don't like having a lot of stuff. And so lately this has come up a little bit with stuff and having lots of stuff. James is cleaning out his parents' house, and so lots of stuff is coming our way. And it was kind of a little source of contention. And I was getting frustrated, like, why do we have to have all this stuff? And it started to get a little bit heated. We don't really, fight and yell or anything like that, but we were definitely coming at this from different perspectives. And I took a step back and started to think about, okay, what is really the issue here? Because even when you think the issue, for example, it's about stuff, it's really not. It's deeper than that. And so I took a few steps back and thought about what it was for me and thought about what it could be for James. And then I went to him and asked him, like, could it be this? And then we had a real honest conversation that wasn't heated at all, that helped us to better understand each other and to come to a better solution, which in this case, required me to let some stuff go and not be so worried about having stuff. And that was the right answer for this particular time. But I would not have gotten there unless I had taken those few steps back to look at what was really happening.
Really, really good example. And, I really have to give you credit for taking a step back and asking yourself what it could be, because I think you figured it out. What it was for me, and I'll share with the audience, is just that it's hard for me to let go of a lot of things having to do with my childhood. And so I tend to be a little bit more sentimental than my wife, which is kind of ironic. Sometimes, I don't know, I guess the stereotypical view is that the wife is a little bit more sentimental. But anyway, that's not the case with me and Chanel, but I just needed some time with those things. And, I don't even think I've admitted this to you when we were talking too, but just taking a look and a step back on why that's so hard for me is I just want more time with it. And it's kind of, silly when I've been thinking about it. It's going to be something that I don't really want in the end. And I think that you already know that, right? Like, we don't need this, but you realized that it was important enough for me to hold on to for just a little bit longer until I guess I came to that realization myself. So anyway, that's just one example of something that could set you off on the wrong course.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, exactly, because that's not that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things, but it could have gotten us off. Because when you let things just sit there and kind of fester, then you keep, you know, it becomes this issue and you're like, your stuff is bothering me, or whatever the case may be, whatever the issue is. But when you don't resolve it, you continue down this path that's a few degrees off. And so sometimes it takes going back to the root of the issue, to the heart of what matters, so that you can course correct, you know, right at the outset of your journey, instead of on down the line when then you're 20 degrees off course and it becomes a much bigger deal.
Really good point. I love that. I was just thinking about the story that you read to begin with, and if they could, of course, if those passengers could go back and, you know, catch the person who was ever supposed to enter in the correct course, you know, if they could go back to that point, of course they'd enter in the right course, because they know the outcome. And so I love how you point out that if we can go back to the source of contention, or whatever you want to call it, that is where we can do the course correction. And I think, again, humility is so important. If you will just be willing to make the concession, give your spouse the benefit of the doubt, or truly seek to understand what the issue is, because many times it's not what it is on the surface.
Yeah. Okay, so I think this is good stuff. And I think that one thing I want to make sure that we get into a little bit more is when you feel this, like you mentioned, we've had times when we're kind of off and just, it's nothing huge. It's not these huge issues, but where it's just not as smooth or as good as we want it to be. So when you're there and you feel your marriage starting to head off course, how do you make those course corrections?
Well, we talked about self-discipline for one, okay? And, you know, I wrote something down as I was thinking about our conversation today that we would have. Your spouse, they want your heart. They want your willing mind. And I think, again, it comes to humility. And if you can, I'm going to give you an example of something in our marriage here. So the other day we were in the bathroom getting ready for something, and Chanel made a comment, and like, it was just a joke, and I took it so seriously, and I don't even know why. And she's like, "Hey, you know, like I was kidding around. What's going on?" And it was an eye opener to me, and for me, it was, hey, you know, you don't need to be so thin-skinned about a little joshing, I guess, right? So it comes in waves, I want to say. Like, you of course, you're not going to keep poking if something's sensitive, and I'm not saying my wife does, but I think that if you can ease up, maybe not be so thin-skinned, that could be something that would definitely help.
Yeah, okay, that's a huge one that we can all work on for sure. One thing that I was thinking along these lines is, if you feel yourself heading off course, to have the conversation. I mean, sometimes we are scared almost to ask the question, but go to your spouse. And James used to do this. Well, he still does it occasionally, but he started this early in our marriage, where he would ask me, what can I do to be a better husband? And that is a powerful question when your spouse comes to you and says, you know, what can I do? What is one little thing that I can work on that would make our marriage smoother? When you take the time to ask a question and you show your spouse that you care about the answer, that's going to make a huge payoff in the end, you know, because your spouse knows that you want to be better, you want to make a difference. And I think that a question like that can also be a lot more conducive to change and to an open conversation than saying something like, and this is what I have a tendency to do. What's wrong? What's going on? You know, why things haven't been as smooth? Why? And I think you need to be careful, because questions like that can put your spouse on the defensive when you're more looking at it as, what can I do to change? And you're asking your spouse, what can I do to make this better? I think that that goes back to what James was saying about humility, but that really opens a conversation and gives the possibility of change and of that course correction.
Wow, absolutely. That's powerful. I think that you get in trouble when you start using the word you. And so when you're taking a step back and thinking about, okay, what can I do? That's so different. It's totally different than the thought of, well, you always. And I think you get in so much trouble when you start pointing the finger and saying, pointing out the flaw in your spouse is what I'm getting at.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's totally true. And that goes along with that idea of the questions need to be focused on what you can control, which is yourself. So, okay, in this story that we started off with, one thing that stands out to me is the pilots were flying this plane, and because of the snow and the ice and everything being white and the clouds above were white, they couldn't see what was going on until it was too late. Now, I think that this has a direct correlation to marriage because in marriage, it's not just you and your spouse working on your marriage all day, right? You've got careers and you've got kids and you've got all these things, volunteer stuff and church stuff and all this stuff going on. And so it's easy to be blinded by everything else that's going on in life and sometimes to not even see the problem. So any thoughts on how you notice it, how you see the problem?
Oh, really good question. Well, what we've talked about, just taking that step back and trying to understand what it is that you might be doing that contributes to the contention or the course going off. I'm not sure what else I'd say to that.
Okay. I'm not sure 100% either, but let's see. The pilots didn't see until it's too late. How do you see the problem? Edit here.
How'd you start? You asked me what?
So the pilots didn't see until it was too late. They couldn't even see that there was a problem. How do you see the problem? Because you're so busy with life. Okay, I have an answer. Do you have anything you want to say?
Well, you asked me.
Yeah, so if you can come up with anything. One thing that I'm thinking of that if you want to talk about and I down on is like we talked about daily rituals, but what about other kind of rituals? Things like date night, making your marriage a priority so that you have time alone, those check-in times, so vacation or date night, or you can even mention companionship inventory if you don't have times or even just sitting together on the couch at night, but if you don't have times when you're regularly together in your marriage, then you might not be able to see it. And that's how you hear these couples that just divorce after being married, for 30 years because they're just go, go, go. And then they finally see each other and like, oh, here's our marriage we never worked.
Right.
Okay, the pilots didn't see that there was a problem until it was too late. So how do you see the problem?
Life really does get in the way sometimes, or it just becomes busy. And how unfortunate and tragic when couples get to that point in their marriage where they feel like it's just too late. We're done, or this is ended. And it doesn't have to be that way. If you can do those small and simple things, spending the time together, going out on those dates, the things that you set up with your spouse, I mean, that's really so foundational. And it needs to be, I guess, discussed frequently. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so along those same lines, I feel like beyond kind of the daily rituals that we talked about are like you briefly mentioned date night, and I think those weekly rituals or even bigger things like going on trips together or just times when making sure you're making time as a couple to be alone together and to have, times when it's apparent that you're working on your marriage, because it's so easy to get busy with other things in your life, and then you're not actually actively working on your marriage. And that's why date night is so important, to have that time. And it doesn't have to be date night doesn't necessarily mean out at a restaurant. Date night means time alone as a couple. That could be in your family room, but it does mean time when you are talking and actively engaged in your relationship.
I love that. That's so true. I can think of just a very recent time that we spent together where we were able to talk some things out. We have a lot of decisions, as all of you do, and we were able to take time to set the course where we want to go. I think that's fun to do as well, looking into the future and setting the course. So I think that's one thing that you can do to avoid becoming off course or saying that it's too late. Set the course. Dream together, share what you'd like to have happen in the future. And when you're spending that time together, that's how you ensure that you're staying the course.
I love that. Okay, I think that's a perfect place to end on is, whether you're feeling a few degrees off right now in your marriage or whether things are smooth sailing, take the time to set the course, to get together with your spouse and to look forward. Are we going where we want to go, both as a couple, in our family, in all these things that we have going on in our life? Is it the direction we want to go? Because unlike the story that we read earlier, there's no airline guy who's setting the course here. This is us. This is our marriage, and we get to decide that. And so as a couple, when you decide that together and you are going the same direction and you are making these times to check in both daily and weekly and, throughout your lives, then you're going to stay on track and you're not going to be off by a few degrees. So I think that is what I would leave you with, is to check in and to take the time to do that. So I hope this has been helpful for you guys. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week on Moms Who Know. Thanks again for joining us on this special episode of Couples Who Know on the Moms Who Know podcast. If you love this episode, please take just a second and share it. That helps so much to get the word out, and I appreciate you doing that. Thank you. A reminder to visit the website, momswhoknowpodcast.com/morning to get all the details on Ultimate Morning Makeover.